The tunnels under Outpost Brannock. 7 smelled like rust and old ice. Nobody went down there anymore. The mining crews had abandoned them 40 years ago when the colony failed. And since then, the only things living in those corridors were frost beetles and silence. That was exactly why Danny Whitfield liked them. He was 12 years old, small for his age, and quiet in a way that made adults forget he was in the room. His mother hauled cargo between stations and was gone more than she was home. His father had died 2 years back, a pressure seal failure on a transport shuttle, quick and final. Danny did not talk about it. He explored instead. He had mapped most of the upper tunnels by memory. He knew which paths looped back, which ones dead-ended into frozen rock walls, and which ones dropped into deeper levels that even the original miners had marked as unstable. Today, he went deeper than usual. The sealed door was at the end of a narrow passage on sublevel 4. It was old, heavy, and covered in frost so thick it looked like fur. The lock mechanism was dead, but Danny had found a maintenance pry bar 2 weeks ago, and he had been waiting for a reason to use it. He jammed it into the gap and pulled until his arms burned. The door groaned open. Inside was a storage chamber, maybe 10 meters across. Cargo containers sat stacked against the walls, most of them cracked and empty. Old equipment lay scattered on the floor. Broken drill heads, strip cables, a helmet with a shattered visor. Everything was coated in ice. Danny almost turned back. Then he saw it. Sitting on a metal shelf against the far wall, half buried in frost, was an oval object roughly the size of a basketball. Dark gray, smooth, and covered in faint silver lines that ran across its surface like veins. Danny reached out and touched it. Cold. Colder than the air, colder than the walls. It felt like holding a stone pulled from deep space. But under that cold, somewhere far down, Danny thought he felt something else. A faint hum, a vibration so small it could have been his own heartbeat echoing through his fingers. He wrapped it in his jacket and carried it up. Relly was in her lab when Danny walked in. She was a Sorvani, tall, four-armed, with pale blue skin that turned darker at the joints and large black eyes that never seemed to blink. She had been a xenobiologist for 30 years, stationed at this frozen outpost because the council had run out of places to send her that she had not already argued herself out of. She looked at the object in Danny's arms and went very still. Then she moved fast. She cleared a table, placed the egg under a scanner, and ran 3 separate analysis programs without saying a word. Danny stood in the corner and watched her hands shake. "Where did you find this?" she asked. "Sublevel 4. Old storage room." "How long ago?" 20 minutes. Relly stared at the scanner readout. Her 4 hands pressed flat against the table like she was trying to hold herself steady. "This is a Kralith egg," she said. Danny had never heard the word before. Relly explained, and her voice was not steady. The Kralith were a species of massive winged creatures that had lived across dozens of worlds thousands of years ago. Some civilizations had worshipped them. Others had hunted them. They had been declared extinct over 300 years ago. No living specimen, no viable egg, had been found since. Until now, the egg was alive. Barely. The scanner showed a faint embryonic signature deep inside, but its internal temperature was dropping. At its current rate, it would be dead in 6 standard days. Relly contacted Gavros, the outpost administrator. He was a Pelori, gray-green scaled skin, broad shoulders, and a face that looked like it had never smiled on purpose. He listened to Relly's report, looked at the egg, and called the council. The council's response came back 4 hours later. Ship the egg to a Core World laboratory for study. Handle with care. Do not attempt local incubation. Relly told Gavros that moving the egg would kill it. The cold of transport, the vibration, the time, it would not survive. Gavros shrugged. He followed orders. That was his job. But Relly was not done. She tried everything she had. Heat lamps set to precise temperatures. Thermal gel wraps designed for fragile biological specimens. A plasma warming pod she had borrowed from the medical bay. She adjusted settings, recalibrated, tried again and again. Nothing worked. The egg's temperature kept falling. Slowly, steadily, like a clock running down. On the second day, Danny came back to the lab. He sat on a stool in the corner and watched Relly pull another failed heating device away from the egg with all four hands shaking. "Why doesn't it work?" he asked. Relly sat down heavily. She explained that Kralith eggs were different from any other species in the known galaxy. They did not just need heat. They needed living warmth, a biological presence that the embryo could sense and bond with. The ancient Kralith had bonding partners who held eggs against their own bodies for months, sharing their heat, their heartbeat, their presence. No machine had ever been able to replicate that. "What temperature does it need?" Danny asked. Relly looked at him. 37.2 degrees. Constant. Direct skin contact. Danny said nothing. He looked at the egg sitting on the table, its silver veins dim, its surface cold enough to sting. He went back to his bunk and sat in the dark for a long time. He was thinking. Relly locked the lab at 2,200 hours and went to her quarters. She did not sleep. She sat at her desk and read through 300 years of failed Kralith preservation reports, each one ending the same way. Embryo non-viable, specimen lost, species status unchanged. Extinct. Always extinct. She did not hear Danny's footsteps in the corridor outside. The boy moved quietly. He had learned that from the tunnels, where noise echoed and drew attention from things you did not want to meet. The lab door had a keypad lock, but Danny had watched Relly enter the code twice. She always used the same 4 digits. Scientists were smart about most things, but careless about the small ones. The door slid open. The lab was dark except for the pale glow of the monitoring screens. The egg sat on its padded stand in the center of the table, sensors attached to its surface, readouts blinking slow warnings in red. Temperature falling. Heartbeat fading. Danny pulled his shirt up and pressed the egg against his bare stomach. The cold hit him like a punch. He gasped, clenched his teeth, and held on. After a minute, the shock faded into a deep ache. After 5 minutes, the ache became a dull throb. After 10, his body adjusted. He wrapped his jacket around both himself and the egg, tucked it tight, and walked back to his bunk. He lay down on his side with the egg cradled against his chest, his arms folded around it, his body curled like a shell. The cold seeped into his skin. He shivered for a long time. Then, slowly, his body did what human bodies do. It pushed back. His core temperature held at 37 degrees. His skin warmed the surface of the egg. His heartbeat pressed steady against it, 62 beats per minute, hour after hour. Danny slept. At 0600, Relly opened the lab and found the egg missing. She did not scream, but the sound she made brought Gavros running from his office. 4 outpost staff joined the search within minutes. Sun, the Halari medic, was the one who checked Danny's quarters. She found him asleep in his bunk, the egg pressed against his body, his jacket wrapped tight around both of them. His face was pale and his hands were cold, but his breathing was steady and deep. Sun called Relly. The xenobiologist arrived with a portable scanner and knelt beside Danny's bunk without waking him. She held the scanner over the egg for 30 seconds. Then she sat back on the floor and put 2 of her 4 hands over her face. The egg's temperature had stabilized. For the first time in days, it had stopped falling. It had actually risen by half a degree. The embryonic heartbeat was stronger. Not by much, but enough. The readings were clear. Danny woke up an hour later with Relly, Gavros, and Sun standing over him. He looked at their faces, then looked down at the egg still pressed against his chest. He held it tighter. "Give it back," Gavros said. "No," Danny said. Gavros was not a cruel man, but he was a careful one. He explained firmly that a 12-year-old child could not be responsible for a xenobiological specimen of this significance. The egg belonged to the council. It was not a pet. It was not a toy. It was the last known remnant of an extinct species, and it needed to be handled by professionals. Danny listened. Then he said no again. Relly stepped between them. She showed Gavros the scanner data. She pointed at the temperature graph, the long downward slope of the past 4 days, and then the sharp curve upward starting exactly when Danny had taken the egg. "Human body temperature is 37 degrees, she said. "The egg needs 37.2. No incubation technology, 1/2 can hold that temperature with the biological resonance the embryo requires. The boy can." Gavros stared at the data. "This is not a solution." This is a child holding an egg. Yes, Relly said. And it is working. Gavros contacted Danny's mother by long-range comm. She was 3 days out on a cargo haul. When she heard what her son had done, there was a long silence on the line. Then she said, "That sounds like Danny." She did not tell him to stop. She did not tell him to continue. She told Gavros that her son had carried his father's toolkit around for 6 months after the funeral, sleeping with it next to his bed, because it was the last thing that still smelled like him. Danny did not let go of things. Gavros set a deadline. 3 days. If the egg showed no further improvement in 3 days, it would be prepared for transport to the council labs. Danny had 3 days to prove that his body could do what 30 years of xenobiology could not. Danny nodded. He pulled the egg closer against his chest, adjusted his jacket around it, and lay back down. Relly watched him from the doorway. She had spent her entire career trying to save dying species with technology, with funding, with research papers and grant proposals, and carefully controlled experiments. She had failed more times than she could count. Now she was watching a boy save one with nothing but warmth. Son brought Danny a cup of broth and a blanket an hour later. She did not say anything. She just set them beside his bunk and left quietly. The egg hummed faintly against Danny's chest. He held on. Nobody on Outpost Brannock 7 had ever watched a child try to keep something alive by refusing to put it down. They watched now. Danny carried the egg everywhere. He walked the corridors slowly, one hand always pressed against his chest where the egg sat bundled inside his jacket. He ate in the mess hall with the egg in his lap, spooning broth with one hand while the other held the egg steady against his body. He slept curled around it, his breathing slow and measured, his skin pressed tight against the gray shell. The outpost staff started calling it the Long Watch. Nobody remembered who said it first, but the name stuck. Son checked Danny's vitals every morning and every evening. On the first day, she frowned at her readings. His calorie intake was too low. His sleep was broken. He woke every few hours to adjust the egg's position, making sure it stayed pressed against bare skin. His body temperature held steady at 37 degrees, but maintaining that output while also heating the egg was costing him energy he was not replacing. She brought him extra rations without being asked. Protein bars, warm broth, dried fruit she had traded from a supply shipment 2 weeks ago. She left them beside his bunk or on the mess hall table near his seat. She never told him to eat. She just made sure the food was there. Danny ate when he remembered. Most of the time, he forgot. Relly monitored the egg with obsessive precision. She had set up a portable scanner that she carried with her, checking the readouts every hour. The data told a story she had never seen before in 30 years of work. On day 2 of the Long Watch, she detected it. A rhythmic pulse inside the egg. Faint, barely registering on the scanner, but unmistakable. A heartbeat. Relly sat in her lab and stared at the readout for a long time. Then she put her head down on the table and cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way someone cries when something they had given up on starts breathing again. She had watched 17 species go extinct during her career. She had held dying creatures in her 4 hands and felt them stop moving. She had written reports with words like non-viable and terminal decline so many times that the language had lost its weight. Every failure had taken a piece of her until she had stopped expecting anything else. Now, there was a heartbeat where there had been silence for 300 years, and it was beating because a human boy refused to let go. The rest of the outpost reacted in their own ways. A Pelori trader named Gris laughed when he heard about Danny. He sat in the mess hall and told anyone who would listen that humans were the most sentimental species in the galaxy, that they would bond with a rock if it sat still long enough, and that the boy was wasting his time on an egg that was probably already dead inside. Nobody argued with him, but nobody laughed along either. A Halari engineer named Pol, who rarely spoke to anyone and spent most of his time repairing the outpost's aging thermal systems, left something outside Danny's bunk door on the second night. It was a thermal wrap, hand-knitted from insulated fiber, sized to fit around a boy's torso and whatever he might be holding against it. There was no note. Pol never mentioned it. Danny found it, put it on, and kept walking. By day 3, the egg had changed. The silver veins on its surface which had been dim and barely visible when Danny first found it, were now glowing. Not brightly, just a faint shimmer like moonlight under ice. The gray shell felt warmer to the touch. Not warm, but less cold. The difference was small, but it was everything. Relly confirmed what the glow meant. The embryo was growing. Cells were dividing. The creature inside was building itself, feeding on the warmth that Danny's body pushed into the shell hour after hour. She brought the data to Gavros. The outpost administrator sat behind his desk and looked at the readouts for a long time. He was not a scientist. He did not understand half the numbers on the screen. But he understood the graph, the long flat line of the egg's decline, and then the sharp upward curve that started the night Danny had taken it. The deadline was 3 days, Relly said. The egg is alive. The embryo has a heartbeat. It is growing. Gavros said nothing. The council wants it shipped to a lab, Relly continued. If we take it away from the boy now, the temperature will drop. The embryo will die. We will have killed the last Kralith in the galaxy because a committee wanted to follow procedure. Gavros leaned back in his chair. He was a man who followed rules. He had built his entire career on following rules. Rules kept people alive on stations like this, where one wrong decision could crack a pressure seal or vent an atmosphere. But rules had not kept this egg alive. A boy had. Gavros looked at the data one more time. Then he closed the file and did not call the council. He did not say he was on Danny's side. He did not need to. The silence said enough. That night, Danny sat in the observation corridor with the egg against his chest. Through the thick glass, the frozen surface of Darrow stretched out under a sky full of unfamiliar stars. The temperature outside was -87. Inside Danny's jacket, pressed against his heart, the egg pulsed with a rhythm that matched his own. The council retrieval order arrived on a priority channel at 0900 on day 4. It was not a suggestion. It was not a request. It was a directive stamped with the seal of the Central Research Authority, and it left no room for interpretation. A retrieval ship was already in transit. Estimated arrival, 36 hours. The egg was to be secured in a stasis container, prepped for transport, and handed over to the xenobiology team upon arrival. All local personnel were to cooperate fully. The directive mentioned Danny once, in a single line near the bottom. The civilian miner involved is to be thanked for his assistance and removed from further contact with the specimen. Relly read it twice. Then she threw her datapad across the lab hard enough to crack the screen against the far wall. She opened a comm channel to the council liaison office and argued for 40 minutes. She sent data. She sent graphs. She sent a detailed report on Kralith bonding biology that she had written in the middle of the night, referencing every surviving text from the species' history. The embryo had bonded with Danny. Their heartbeats were synchronized. The egg's temperature was being maintained entirely by the boy's body. Separating them now was not a risk. It was a death sentence for the last Kralith in existence. The liaison listened politely. Then he told her the directive stood. Relly closed the channel and sat in silence for a long time. Danny found out because he was not supposed to. He had been walking past Gavros's office, the egg warm against his chest, when he heard Relly's voice through the thin walls. She was not shouting. She was speaking in the cold, precise tone of someone who had run out of patience and was now operating on something harder. He stood outside the door and listened. He heard the words retrieval ship and 36 hours and removed from contact. He understood all of them. He did not knock on the door. He did not argue. He turned around and walked toward the lower levels of the outpost. By the time anyone noticed he was gone, he was already 2 sublevels deep and moving into the tunnels. The old mining corridors were dark and cold and silent. Danny knew them the way most children knew the hallways of their own homes, by feel, by memory, by the particular sound his footsteps made on different types of flooring. He moved quickly and quietly, deeper into the maze of abandoned passages, until he reached a chamber he had found months ago on sublevel 6. It was small, just a carved-out space in the rock, maybe 4 meters across, with a low ceiling and a single ventilation shaft that still pulled air from the upper levels. The temperature was cold, but not dangerous, around 5 degrees, warmer than the surface by a long margin. Danny had left a blanket here weeks ago, folded on a flat rock. He wrapped himself and the egg in it and sat down with his back against the wall. The egg pulsed gently against his chest. He could feel it clearly now, a steady thrum, like a second heart beating just below his own. Gavros ordered a search within an hour. 6 outpost staff fanned out through the lower levels with lights and scanners. They searched for 3 hours. They found nothing. The tunnels were a labyrinth, and Danny had spent months learning every turn. Relly knew where he had gone. Not the exact location, but she understood the logic. He had gone where he felt safe. He had gone underground, into the dark, into the cold, where no one could reach him. She did not join the search. Sun knew more than she let on. She had watched Danny over the past 4 days. She had seen which corridor he always turned down when he walked the lower levels. She had noticed the dirt on his boots, the kind that only came from sublevel 6. She was a medic. Observing was her job. That evening, while the search parties rested and regrouped, Sun walked quietly to sublevel 6. She carried a pack with water, protein bars, a thermal blanket, and a portable heating pad. She found Danny in the small chamber, sitting in the dark, the egg glowing faintly against his chest. She sat down across from him and set the pack between them. "I'm not here to bring you back," she said. Danny looked at her. His face was pale and tired. His eyes were red from the dust in the tunnels. But his hands were steady on the egg. "They want to take it," he said. "I know. If they take it, it will die." Sun nodded. She did not argue. She did not offer false comfort. She just handed him a water bottle and watched him drink. "I will come back tomorrow with more food," she said. "The ventilation here is adequate. Your temperature is stable. The egg is stable." She paused. "Stay warm." She left the way she had come, and she told no one. Relly spent the evening in her lab, composing a series of technical objections to the retrieval directive. She cited 17 separate council regulations on endangered species handling, for xenobiology protocols on bonded organisms, and a legal precedent from 60 years ago involving a Halari nesting colony that the council had tried to relocate against scientific advice. That relocation had killed every egg. She sent the objections to the council liaison. She knew they would not change the directive, but they would slow it down. Every hour of delay was an hour the egg stayed warm. In the tunnels below, Danny pulled the blanket tighter around himself and the egg. Frost crept along the walls. The air was thin and cold and tasted like iron. The egg pulsed against his heart. He held on. Something changed on the 5th morning. Danny felt it before he saw it. He had been drifting in and out of shallow sleep, his back against the cold rock wall, the egg cradled in the curve of his body. The thermal blanket Sun had brought was wrapped around both of them, and the heating pad sat under his legs, keeping the worst of the chill off the stone floor. His body ached from days of poor sleep and not enough food, but his temperature held steady. It always held steady. That was the thing about human bodies. They were stubborn machines that did not know when to quit. The egg moved. Not a vibration. Not the faint pulse he had grown used to over the past 5 days. An actual, physical shift inside the shell. Something pushed outward, and the surface of the egg cracked. Danny sat up. His heart hammered. He held the egg in both hands and watched. A thin line appeared across the dark gray surface, running through one of the silver veins. Then another line, branching off the first. Then a third. The cracks spread slowly, and as they widened, pale silver light spilled out from inside, soft and cold, like starlight filtered through water. The shell was warm now, truly warm. 4 or 5 days Danny had pushed his heat into it, and now the egg was giving it back. The surface under his fingers felt alive in a way it never had before. He could feel the creature inside moving, pressing, working its way out. A piece of shell fell away. Then another. Danny caught the fragments in his palm, small and surprisingly light, like pieces of dried clay. The silver light grew brighter. The cracks widened into gaps, and through the gaps he could see something pale shifting inside. The top of the egg broke open. A head emerged. Small, angular, covered in scales, so white they were almost translucent. 2 large dark eyes blinked open and looked directly at Danny. The eyes were deep and black and had no pupils, like looking into two drops of ink. They reflected Danny's face back at him. The creature pushed itself free of the remaining shell. It was no bigger than a cat. Its body was lean and covered in fine white scales that shimmered faintly in the dim light of the tunnel. Two thin wings, translucent and veined with silver, were folded tight against its back. A long tail curled around its body. For small clawed feet gripped the fragments of shell. It looked at Danny. Danny looked at it. Then it made a sound, a single, clear note, like someone tapping a glass bell. The sound echoed off the tunnel walls and faded into silence. The creature crawled forward across Danny's lap, climbed up his chest, and pressed its head against the side of his neck. Its body was warm. Its heartbeat was fast and light, tapping against Danny's skin like a small drum. It made the bell sound again, softer this time, and then it closed its eyes. Danny did not move. He barely breathed. He sat in the cold dark of the tunnel with a creature that should not exist curled against his throat, and he felt its warmth against his pulse. He stayed like that for a long time. Sun found them an hour later. She came down the tunnel with her morning pack of food and water, turned the corner into the small chamber, and stopped. Danny was sitting where she had left him. The egg was gone. In its place, curled against his chest with its wings folded flat and its tail wrapped around his arm, was a Kralith hatchling. It was asleep. Its breathing was slow and even. Its white scales caught the light from Sun's lamp and scattered it in tiny silver points across the walls. Sun set down her pack very slowly. She lowered herself to the floor across from Danny and sat there. She did not speak. She did not reach for her scanner. She just sat with them in the quiet. After a while, Danny said, "It came out about an hour ago." Sun nodded. It looked at me, and then it just climbed up. Yes. Is that normal? Sun thought about it. For a Kralith? We do not know. Nobody alive has ever seen one hatch. She looked at the creature on Danny's chest. But bonded species often seek their bonding partner immediately after birth. You kept alive. You're the first thing it knows. Danny looked down at the hatchling. It shifted in its sleep and pressed closer against him. Its claws, tiny and sharp, gripped the fabric of his shirt. "I think it is cold," he said. "It was born on a frozen planet in an underground tunnel," Sun said gently. "It is probably a little cold, yes." Danny pulled his jacket close around both of them. Sun sent a message to Relly on her personal comm, 3 words. "It has hatched." Relly arrived 20 minutes later, out of breath from running through corridors and climbing down tunnel ladders. She knelt in front of Danny and held up her scanner with hands that trembled. The hatchling was healthy. Heart rate strong, body temperature stable and rising, neural activity high and organized. It was alive. It was whole. It was the first living Kralith in over 300 years. Relly lowered the scanner. She looked at Danny, tired, pale, thin from 5 days of not eating enough, sitting in a frozen tunnel 6 levels below an outpost that most of the galaxy had forgotten existed. "You did it," she said. "You held on, and you did it." Danny said nothing. He just held the hatchling closer and felt it breathe. The retrieval ship docked at Outpost Brannock, 7 at 1,400 hours on day 6. It was a council vessel, clean, white, and efficient, the kind of ship that had never been patched with salvage parts or held together with cable ties. The airlock hissed open, and 3 figures stepped out. The lead researcher was a Sorvani named Drell. He was taller than Relly, older, with darker blue skin and 4 hands that moved with the practiced precision of someone who had spent decades handling delicate specimens. Behind him walked 2 assistants carrying a stasis container designed to hold biological material at exact temperatures for extended transport. Drell walked into the outpost commons, expecting to collect an egg. He found a boy sitting on a bench near the window with a small white dragon on his shoulder. The hatchling, Danny had named it Frost, was awake and alert. It perched on Danny's shoulder with its thin wings half open, its dark eyes scanning the room. When Drell entered, it turned its head sharply and made a low sound that was not quite a hiss and not quite a growl. Something in between. Something that said very clearly, "I see you." Drell stopped. He stared at the creature for a long moment. Then he looked at Relly, who was standing beside Danny with her arms crossed. All 4 of them. The directive specified an egg, Drell said. The egg hatched, Relly replied. 20 hours ago. The hatchling is healthy, bonded, and stable. Its full medical data is on your datapad. Drell looked at Danny. The bonding partner is a child. The bonding partner is the reason it is alive. Drell set down his equipment case and straightened to his full height. He was not an unkind man, but he was a practical one, and practicality in his world meant that priceless xenobiological specimens belonged in laboratories, not on the shoulders of 12-year-old boys. The Kralith is to be transferred to our facility for study, he said. This is not negotiable. The Central Research Authority has jurisdiction over all extinct and revived species. The creature will receive the best care available. Relly did not raise her voice. She had spent the last 12 hours preparing for this moment, and she delivered her argument with the precision of someone who had been fighting bureaucracies longer than Drell had been alive. She explained Kralith bonding biology. She presented data showing the synchronization between Danny's heartbeat and the hatchlings. She cited the thermal dependency. The creature's body temperature was still partially regulated by its proximity to Danny. Separation at this stage would cause thermal shock, stress response, and probable cardiac failure. She laid it out simply. Take the dragon away from the boy, and it dies. The council would not have a specimen to study. They would have a corpse. Drell listened. He examined the data. He looked at the hatchling on Danny's shoulder, the way its tail curled around the boy's arm, the way it leaned against his neck. He was a scientist. He could read the bond in the creature's posture. But he had orders. Gavro spoke before Drell could. The outpost administrator had been standing in the corner of the commons, silent as always, watching everything. He stepped forward now, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet and firm. The boy stays with the creature, he said. Drell turned to him. Administrator, the council directive is clear. File a complaint. Gavros said it without hesitation, without blinking, without raising his voice. He said it the way he said everything, flatly, practically, and with the unmovable certainty of a man who had made a decision and did not intend to unmake it. It was the first time in his career he had gone against a council order. Drell looked at Gavros for a long time. Then he looked at Relly, then at Danny, who had not said a single word during the entire exchange. The boy just sat there with a dragon on his shoulder, calm and steady, like he had been doing this his whole life. Drell picked up his equipment case and walked back to his ship. He did not take the dragon. The news spread fast. Within 2 days, every major broadcast network in the galaxy carried the story. The details were simple enough for anyone to understand. A species extinct for 300 years. An egg that no technology could save. A human child who held it against his chest for 5 days in a frozen outpost until it hatched. Alien commentators reacted with confusion, admiration, and something that sat uncomfortably close to fear. The Sorvani Science Council released a statement calling it a remarkable case of cross-species biological compatibility. A paloricultural critic wrote a long essay asking what it meant that a species barely 2,000 years in a spaceflight could do what the oldest civilizations in the galaxy could not. The answer, as far as anyone could tell, was simple. Humans ran hot, 37 degrees, all day, all night, awake or asleep, sick or healthy. Their bodies held that temperature with a stubbornness that bordered on absurdity. And when they decided to care about something, truly care, in the way that only humans seem to, they would sit in the dark and the cold and hold it until it lived. Danny did not watch the broadcasts. He did not read the essays or the scientific papers. He fed Frost small pieces of protein ration from his hand and taught it to perch on his arm without digging its claws in too deep. At night, the hatchling slept curled against his chest, exactly where the egg had been. Relly began writing her research paper. She titled it simply, On Human Warmth and the Revival of the Kralith. Danny's mother came home 3 days after the hatching. She walked into the outpost, dropped her cargo bag on the floor, and found her son sitting in the observation dome with a dragon in his lap. She did not say anything for a while. She just sat down next to him and put her arm around his shoulders. Frost looked up at her, chirped once, and went back to sleep. Outside the dome, the frozen surface of Darrow stretched to the horizon under a sky heavy with stars. Somewhere out in the galaxy, the council was still arguing about jurisdiction and protocol and who owned what. Nobody on Outpost Brannock 7 was listening. They were watching a boy and his dragon sit together in the warmth, quiet and still, the way they had been from the very beginning.